Taxonomy is at the heart of understanding life. Naming, classifying and describing new species is one of the fundamental aspects of zoology which underpins everything else. And new species are described every day, but still, a lot of what we know was done a long time ago in the most beautiful and extraordinary way. So come on in for a little bit of a tour of our library. Around 2 million species have been named so far, and we don't know how many are left. But naming an individual species is relatively complicated. You can't just say, I name you Lucius Muir, and have done, because there are rule books to follow. The International Code of Zoological Nomenclature, which defines how exactly one goes about naming a species. And it's a fairly complex procedure with type specimens and diagnoses and all sorts of other aspects you have to consider. But it's relatively familiar to most people who are working in the field, so it doesn't take too long. Now, the structure that we have goes back to Linnaeus, who basically started to formalise things in the 18th century. And he provided guidelines for how you go about it, and was also, he and his disciples, extremely prolific in applying scientific binomial names to as many things as they possibly could. And the system that we use now goes back to effectively the same time. So we have still the emphasis on a diagnosis, something which defines how this species that you are describing differs from all the previous ones. And it's that formalisation that is critical. The rules may have become a little more complex over the years, but it's basically still the same thing. And so, as a paleontologist or zoologist, but anyone who is involved with identifying and describing new species, you need a library. Because most of this work has been published over the last 250 years maybe, in a range of several thousand different journals in hundreds of languages, potentially. And you need to have a knowledge of, if not all of the species that are relevant to you, how to find out about them and how to find them. So basically, you need a library. And an academic library is a little different to the one in your sort of local council library offices, because it contains vast arrays of academic journals, all bound up by year with indexes and all the rest of it. And so you can find any particular issue of any journal going back maybe 150 years, and hopefully it will have that in the library. One of the most critical things that paleontologists need then is a library. And if you're in a university, then you have a library. You have an academic one at your disposal, which has probably hundreds of thousands, if not millions of volumes. And that's all you need, hopefully. You can also get into library loans. You can ask colleagues in other countries for very obscure references, but mostly you'll have it there. If, like us, though, you're independent, then you need to build up your own library if you're going to avoid, in our case, something like an 8-hour round trip down to Cardiff to look up a paper. So we've actually been very lucky over the years in that people have given us old bits of libraries that are no longer needed, archives from people who have retired or moved on, and you end up with quite a decent collection of things. And we have a pretty standard sort of random library here of bits and pieces that are relevant to what we do. Things like brachiopods, echinoderms occasionally study, trilobites, ostracods and so on. Very wide range of different groups of fossils. But Lucy and I are both specialists in different fields, and so we have our own particularly detailed libraries as well. Most of the articles that describe new species are individual articles in particular journals. So you can get things like new Caradocian ostracods from the Oslo-Asger region of Norway, which was published in Geological. Sorry for mangling that. It describes a range of species, some of them new, some of them old ones, but a new occurrence of them, and with new information potentially about the details, the form of it. And that's how most of the papers go. Of course, usually, if you have your own personal library, it is not going to be in the original versions. And so going back to when we were students, we had to photocopy everything. We spent long hours photocopying hundreds of papers, and so you end up with quite sort of grotty level photocopies, but they just about work, of particular things that we needed for a particular paper. So we have dozens of box files, like this, of photocopies and also reprints. In the days before the internet, though, people didn't want to just rely on photocopies because the quality wasn't that great, so they used what are called reprints. And these are basically offprints of the individual papers, which the authors could then send to whoever they liked. And you might get 100 copies of this when you published a paper, and you could then send them off to people who might be interested. And quite often they have rather nice little signatures and inscriptions on them. So this is B.B. Bancroft's geological work, the 2 Upper Ordovician of the Crossfell Inlier by Archie Lamont, who is a Carnegie Research Fellow in the University of Edinburgh. And this one, which is a very short little pamphlet, just a few species, has an inscription at the top saying Dr. H.B. Whittington from Archie Lamont. And Harry Whittington, for anyone who's involved with Burgess Shale research, is a very famous name in paleontological circles, and it's rather lovely to have one of these that was sent to him by another legendary figure, but in a very different way. Archie Lamont published a lot of things which have since been questioned in their interpretation, but everyone loves his stuff. But just to have that little bit of history is a big part of the appeal of having one of these paper libraries. And there's an awful lot of it. I've got one over here somewhere, hang on. Yeah, this one is somewhat treasured. It was given to me by my PhD supervisor, Alan Thomas, on completing the PhD. And it is the Trilobites of the Leptina Limestone by Elsa Warburg. And it has on there the signature of Dr. W.J. Whittard, with the compliments of the authors. So Bill Whittard was also a famous figure in paleontology, and if you go to the Paleoscolecids video that I did, the Paleoscolex was described by Whittard. So there's just all these lovely connections. You can just get lost in these libraries, and I probably will, but I will try to keep on track so that I don't just sort of keep rambling on for hours and hours. You've probably got the idea by now that trying to track down potentially hundreds of papers about particular groups of fossils from around Europe or the world is not exactly straightforward, and you'd be right. So there is, luckily for us, a tradition called the monograph. This is where an author who is a specialist on a particular group will describe all of the fossils known from a particular group at a particular time or place. So this is one example. It's the Ordovician brachiopods from the Shelve district of Shropshire. The Shelve area is an inlier. It's a quite well-known classic area of geology that includes a lot of important faunas that have had a long history of description. So it's not a trivial thing to do the Shelve inlier. But what we have here is a thick volume of systematic descriptions of the brachiopods, or redescriptions. There aren't many new ones, but there are some new species in here as well. And then a whole stack of plates, photographic plates showing all of the species that are discussed. So if you were to go looking for brachiopods in the Shelve inlier, you could take this along with you, and probably everything that you find will be in this one volume. Of course, that's just the Ordovician ones of the Shelve district. So you need other volumes for the Silurian or for anything else that you happen to be looking at. and that's why it builds up into quite a substantial library. But that's brachiopods, an extremely common fossil group which has a very well-studied record. You don't have to worry too much about the living ones for these because the fossil ones are much more diverse and they form their own well-studied fauna. So most people who study Ordovician brachiopods are not going to have to worry much about the living brachiopods. I mean, they'll know about them just out of interest, but they won't have to worry about the species-level taxonomy. It can be a little different when you work on other groups. So, as some of you may or may not be aware, I do have a particular fondness for sponges. That's my main specialism, and particularly from the early Paleozoic. Now, sponges are a much less well-described group than some other fossils, mainly because you generally need exceptional preservation in order to get them in the first place, and then you need a taxonomist around to handily write them up. So there has been a monograph of the British fossil sponges. Here it is. It may be slightly outdated. This is by George Jennings Hind, and the date was 1887 to 1912. It was mostly 1887 and 1888, but he added an extra volume later on. And this is, well, it's an extraordinary piece of work. He described at that time everything that was known about British fossil sponges from effectively all ages up to the Jurassic. He didn't do the Cretaceous. Problem with these, you always open them on the blank pages, but you have these beautiful plates of drawings which are then etched, lithographed, and it's just a work of art. It's just a pleasure to actually to have to refer to one of these and just spend time poring over it. They're really exquisitely done, and usually they're extremely accurate. Most of these illustrations were printed by lithography, which was quite big business back in the 19th century, because it was by far the finest way we had of producing extremely delicate illustrations. And these were originally drawn or painted and then would be etched into extremely fine limestone. That limestone being called lithographic limestones. And these tended to have formed in the Cretaceous period, late Jurassic and early Cretaceous, and they were normally from lagoonal type conditions where you have extremely fine sediment. And as a byproduct, you also have rather remarkable fossils. So there's quite a poor fish on here. I wouldn't worry too much about that one. But there's a slightly better one on this lithographic limestone from Lebanon, along with a couple of little brittle stars. And so you end up with quite large-scale excavations, and eventually you get slightly more impressive fossils turning up in them, like Archaeopteryx, which of course is then described, published, and the plates are printed using the rock from the same quarry where the fossils were found. It's rather lovely, really. As well as doing his monograph on the sponges up to the Jurassic period, Hind also did a sort of monograph of the fossil sponges of the British Museum of Natural History, which later became the Natural History Museum, where he covered everything that was present in their collections. And so this is also an extremely valuable piece of work, because the sponges have not been monographed for the UK since that time. Reed in the 1960s the Cretaceous sponges, or the hexactinellids of the Cretaceous, but that's it. So it tends to be in the UK that there's one fossil sponge expert every 50 years or so, maybe 70 years. So yeah, I hope nobody suggests I have to do the whole lot, because we've since added another few hundred species. But there are other monographs from elsewhere, so this is something that is extremely precious to me. It is the Paleozoic Reticulate Sponges of the family Dictyospongiidae by Hall and Clark in 1898. And this one is a bit of a monster. So it's also just exquisitely beautiful. These are highly, well, they're very sort of ornamented sponges with this beautiful sort of network skeleton. And this is a piece of work which covered all of them that were known at that time. They're mainly Devonian, but it's an entire family which was very extensive and has never been revised since, not in any significant way. So you have a volume like that. It is then the standard work for a long, long time, in this case, well over a century. But those are all fossils. And if you're working on something like sponges, where the fossil record is fairly limited, but there's a lot of continuity with modern faunas, then you really need to know about the modern faunas as well. Want to have a look at my modern monographs? This bookcase contains a few of the old paleontological monographs, as well as quite a lot of box files from the pre-internet age, but mostly this is monographs of modern zoological expeditions. This goes back largely to the history around the 1880s through to the 1920s or so, when there were a lot of major explorations, expeditions of discovery, voyages of discovery, going out and trawling through the deep oceans in various remote parts of the world, collecting everything that they could find, preserving it, and then the results would be written up by biologists who were specialised in different groups around the world. And this is all sponges, and it's probably one of the best collections of biological sponge monographs that there is in the UK, including in universities. I have some things that I've never seen available for sale before, and these include the Challenger expedition, the most famous one, the Albatross, the Indian Marine Survey Ship Investigator, and many others. And some of them are much smaller, but the really iconic ones are these thick ones, mostly from the Challenger expedition. The Challenger expedition is probably the most important one in many ways. There are something like 60 volumes of this published for the various groups. This volume is just the hexactinellids, the glass sponges, and you have one volume of plates and one volume of text. The plates is bigger, which is usually the way. They just put so much effort into the illustrations. And if you have a look in the back of these, there is also a map. And this map shows that they basically circumnavigated the world. And all of the blue and red spots are locations where they were sampling, and you have this extraordinary coverage of remote areas of the tropical oceans especially, but all over the world, not the Arctic Ocean, but pretty much everywhere else. And this is an extraordinary feat, and they must have collected tens of thousands of specimens, which then were made available to specialist researchers around the time. It was a multi-year journey, and the volumes were written up over the succeeding decades. When you see these plates, you realise immediately why these are so important for us as paleontologists, because they describe not only the overall shape of the sponges, but also so much exquisite detail in a way that is easy to interpret. So you can see here the shape of the soft tissues, the form and architecture of the skeleton, the shape of the individual spicules in fine detail. Everything is laid out as you might see it as a sponge. And when you're working in things like the Angiebiota, where you have rather beautiful sponges which are flattened onto the rock, when you see this type of arrangement here, it's absolutely perfect for interpreting what we're seeing as the fossils, in a way that a lot of the modern studies don't necessarily show in the same level of detail or with the same usefulness, the same direct comparison with what we find as fossils. They're just absolutely beautiful pieces of work. And this is an entire volume of these plates. When you see the direct comparison of one of these Venus flower baskets, a different species, different genus in fact, with a modern one, you start to appreciate just how accurate and detailed these drawings are, because it contains all of the information you might want to see. Not all in the one illustration, of course, because you have the more detailed views which tell you all about the individual spicule types and so on. But this is just wonderful to be able to have and pore over on a dark winter's evening. Amazing things. If that one was good, though, then there's one more in this collection which is absolutely the star. This is something I was incredibly lucky to find. It's this one here. This is also the Challenge of Expedition. This is the report on the Monaxonida by Ridley and Dendy. So it's basically all of the demosponges that have a spicule skeleton made of monaxons. And you'll notice the binding is a little bit different. This is sort of black gilt leather with little bits of green Morocco here and there. It is a little bit worn, it's a little bit elderly, this book. It's from 1880, let me just check a bit. 1887. And it's just rather lovely because of various other features about it. So it has here a plate in the inside from Arthur Dendy, who was the author. Let's have a closer look at this one. So there we have the author's nameplate, and down here we've got the original cover, or the paper cover. It was originally leather bound as well, with Arthur Dendy's signature at the top, which is always rather nice to see. And between the two, not that one, other side, we have an inscription here which is presented to the author by direction of the Lords Commissioners of Her Majesty's Treasury. I'm guessing this wasn't a cheap book to print, but it's a lovely, lovely thing. And the real treasure is that, well, these are, of course, just wonderful volumes in their own right, and all the text is there. It has all the diagnoses, all the descriptions, the localities, the locations where everything came from. And then we get into the plates. Oh, we've got the tables of bathymetry, the locations where these things co-occur. And then you get into the plates. But here we've got something a little different, in that these two are the original ink drawings that this plate was etched from. So you can compare directly the lithograph with the original, and you can see they're not completely identical, but they are very, very close. The job of the artist first to actually draw these things, and then the engraver to convert it into an etching, which could then be printed. It's an extraordinarily skilled piece of work. And this would have had to been done for every single plate in a volume like this. And the plates are quite extensive. Sometimes they're multicoloured. Sometimes they're really just lovely works of art. And a few of them, I believe in here and elsewhere, were too big to fit on one plate, so they've had to actually fold in, or have a folded page which can then fold out to show you something on A3. But you can spend hours and hours just looking at these, so I think I will. Have some background music while you're waiting. So you might reasonably be wondering how on earth I can afford to have something like this, because it's an absolute beauty and it's unique. This is obviously the only author's copy and the only copies of those illustrations, but it comes down to pure luck and the fact that it's sponges. So I actually saw this for sale on the internet back in about 2002 when I was a postdoc researching in Cambridge, and obviously I started getting sort of slightly twitchy fingers over it, but it was something like £150. And although it was a wonderful book, I wasn't working on monaxenids at the time and I couldn't really justify it. But then a few weeks later I was browsing around a book fair in Cambridge and there it was on the shelf. I couldn't quite believe it, but it was. The bookseller that had seen advertising it online had come down to this book fair, and apparently, after I got talking to him, he'd been trying to sell it for years because nobody wanted it because it was sponges. He said that if this had been about fish or birds or something else that's really charismatic, then he wouldn't have been able to afford to handle it. And these things would be hundreds of thousands. But for something like this, for sponges, nobody cares. So I actually got it at a discount because he was so glad for it to be going to a home where someone would actually be using it for research. And I still can't quite believe it, but it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. And not that valuable because it's not birds. Unfortunately, this does lead on to another thing. If someone verging on criminal, I would say, wanted to make a lot of money out of one of these books, these monographs, then what they would do is actually cut out the plates and sell them individually. We've seen this happen. We've seen a stack of things like jellyfish and sea anemone illustrations that clearly came from one of these old monographs. And yeah, it's tragic because these things, once they're separated from the information that goes with them, don't have anything like the same value. And it's the sheer scale of these works, the beauty of being able to hold something like this and think about how much effort went into not just the plates, but the descriptions, the detail of the diagnoses, the working out what these species were. You can imagine them poring over benches in libraries with these pickled sponges in glass vials and trying to describe in intricate detail everything that went into them. It would be years and years of solid work to produce something like this. And that, I think, needs a lot more respect than cutting it up for pretty pictures. Since that time, the tradition, there was a perception that maybe these weren't 100% accurate. And when photography came in and became accessible on a large scale, it started to take over. So this is the monograph of the Hexaxinellida of the Albatross expedition by Lendenfeld in 1915. So significantly later, but the main difference is that the new science of photography was now available, including microphotography, or photomicrography, which allows you to illustrate individual spicules down a microscope. So you end up with, in some ways, equally extraordinary volumes, but the illustrations are all photographic, which was considered a big improvement in many ways because there's no question about the accuracy. Unfortunately, there just isn't the same detail. There isn't the same ability to recognise the structure of the skeleton in a way that has been drawn out by those hours down the microscope of specialists who know what they're looking at. And here, I mean, Lendenfeld was obviously a supreme specialist in sponges at the time as well. But from the point of view of illustrating how the skeleton was structured, how all the different components went together, how they combined with the soft tissue, a lot of that is lost. So we don't see the same level of detail, and somehow it doesn't have the same aesthetic beauty to it either. What we do have is much more accurate, and so the combination of this with the even older ones like the Challenger expedition is absolute perfection. Then you see the bits that you know are precisely accurate, as well as the bits that are interpreted and structured in a way that actually makes sense to paleontologists. So there is a huge amount of beauty in these things, but also of knowledge and of detail. Because if it wasn't for these monographs, most of the most recent papers don't show the same architecture scale detail of how the skeleton is put together. And when you're interpreting what is effectively flattened sponges on rocks, that's what you need. So without these, I would have to go back to the original specimens in museums. And those are, of course, in jars of formaldehyde or something like that. And trying to interpret those is not necessarily easy, because a lot of work went into turning the specimen itself into an illustration where you can see the detail and imagine it superimposed as it is in the fossils. So not only are these works of art, and not only are they over the century old, they are also still incredibly useful to paleontologists and to biologists as well. But this is, for paleontology, what we need. It's much better for us in many ways than the modern literature, and this is why I can justify every now and then when I see something like this come up for sale, actually spending what is for me a significant amount of money adding it to the collection, because they are part of our research material. It's something that we can do a certain amount with the one or two specimens that I have, so you can hold things up to the light and see the detail of how those sponges are structured. But the monographs give us far more than we could get from those one or two specimens. Of course, it's not just me who has a collection of monographs. Lucy, come and take the hot seat. Right then, tell us about Ellis and Wood.
Right, Ellis and Wood, the people, were two British Graptolite workers, Gertrude Ellis and Ethel Wood, who were working in the early years of the 20th century up until the 1950s in the case of Gertrude Ellis. And in the early years of the 20th century, they and Charles Lapworth, who was Professor of Geology at Birmingham, produced the monograph of British Graptolites, which is called Ellis and Wood, after the authors. So we have, it is in 3 parts. We have the history of Graptolite research.
Very slim at that stage.
Well, it hadn't been going that long at that point, so it's a very useful summary. Not that I use it very often, but it's very useful to have it. And we have the text.
Lots of text.
And then we have the plate. And this was published in a number of separate parts between 1901 and 1918. And it was done taxonomically. So they published, the early Ordovician things first, and then carried on and ended up in the late Silurian. And published a bit of the history research and the text of that group and the plates for that group all in one. So I've actually had to get this bound with the text and the text all together and plates all together rather than the order in which they were originally published.
Okay. So Do you actually use it?
Oh yes.
And it's, 1901 to 1918 or something, isn't it?
Yes, that's right.
And this is still useful?
Yes, so some of the taxonomy is rather outdated, that some things have decided to be not proper species, lots of new species have been named, the taxonomy has changed rather a lot, so everything that they called monographs, it's now been split up a bit into things like Pistiograptus and Streptograptus and various others that I could go into if you've got time. So you do need to know what things used to be called. But in terms of just getting an idea of what something is, it's incredibly useful because the plates are so good.
Show us these plates then.
I will show you these plates. Let me open it at random. Okay, this is genus Monographs. Yep, there we go.
Right. Those look like little lines to the uninitiated. What makes these so good?
Well, what makes them so good is that Ethel Wood drew all the specimens to produce the plates, and she drew them at sometimes something like 4 times life size, and then they were published at life size. So you can actually go in there with your hand lens and see extra detail. And because this is exactly the size that the Graptolite that you're looking at will be, you can directly compare.
Wow.
Yes.
And you compare that to the modern printing that we have, where you look at it with a hand lens and what you see are lots of little dots.
Yes, the modern printing would tend to be at higher resolution.
Yeah.
In fact, this is probably the best printing they had available at the time, and there's still a bit less detail than there is in the original drawings.
Right.
But still...
And are those lithographed?
Boston Benrose Limited... I'm not honestly sure.
Hang on.
It just says Dell, which is delineated drawn.
Yeah. Maybe they're not.
I don't think it was. I think it was some other process. I can't quite remember what.
Okay, I suppose early 20th century the techniques had moved on a little bit.
Yes.
But yeah, but still, it's to have that level of detail in the printing that you can use a hand lens on the actual image.
It's really handy.
It's not bad, is it?
Yeah. And because it's got, well, all the known British Graptolites at that time, and that of course is almost all the common things, because they were described first generally.
Yeah, okay.
So again, to get an idea of what you've got as a starting point, to then go into the later literature, it's incredibly useful.
So how often do we find something in Britain that isn't in there?
Depends where you're looking, really. Depends where you're looking. Probably not that often. They would have had all the common stuff in here.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think we have found a few new things over the years, but it's not often at all, is it?
No, indeed. And I think often what we found is we found something that's new to the area, but not a new species. It's not... Well, people do find new species of Graptolite all the time, but not necessarily in the UK.
Okay, so this is just Britain. Have people done the same thing for Germany or for China? 有中国比什么?
有.
Oh. 我们可以看吗?
可以. Gosh, the AI is going to have fun with that bit. Yeah, well, of course, the nice thing about Graptolites is you do tend to get the same things worldwide. So that's why something like Ellis and Wood can be widely used in China, for example, because you have a lot of the same species there, or at least genera. But this is a sort of Chinese equivalent.
Ah, 中国比什么?
Yeah, 中国比什, which you have to pronounce very carefully or it sounds like something totally different. And this is not original research, it's a compilation of all the known Graptolites from China. Or planktonic Graptolites, I think. I don't think they did dendroids in this. And it's basically, well, it's in Chinese, which makes it quite interesting. But you've got sort of brief description of the species, where it was reported before, the age, and then you've got at the back, you've got plates, which are generally reproductions of whatever the original illustration was. So sometimes they're perhaps not quite as good as we could do these days.
They don't look quite as good as the Ellis and Wood ones in some ways. But I suppose they're larger scale, so you can see about as much detail.
But it's an incredibly useful compilation. So again, it's a very good starting point.
Yeah.
So you can go and then look up the original description, you can look up other literature. It's a good starting point to get a name, and then you can do lots of other things.
Absolutely. Good. So I've noticed that all of these ones you're showing us are just the tubarium, the skeletal bit which fossilises.
That's what we get with graptolites.
Graptolithologists don't actually need to look at the soft tissues, do they?
No, never. No,
Yeah.
don't need to worry about that.
Not even if they work at Castlebank.
Ah, well, yes, if you work at Castlebank where you do get graptolite soft tissue and graptolite relatives, then you might need to worry a bit about what the soft tissue.
But you're not going to get those from that from those monographs.
Oh no, not at all.
So what do you do then?
I suppose you have to look at monographs about their modern relatives.
Oh, have you got any of those handy?
Yes, I have, as it happens. Would you like to see some?
Absolutely.
All right. What we got here? This is one that we showed in the special members video.
Which might be slightly relevant, but probably not.
So what else have we got here? This is I made quite a little collection of Terrabank monographs during COVID when we couldn't go anywhere and weren't spending money. Just trying to find a good one.
You mean there aren't any good ones?
Well, just one that will look really nice when I hold it up. Oh, this is probably a nice one. This is the Terrabankia Cephalodiscus by D. Rywood. And it's the Terrabanks of the National Antarctic Expedition of 1901 to 1904. And when was this published? Not quite sure when this was published. Anyway, it's reasonably thin one for the monograph.
Yeah, compared with the sponges, that's nothing, is it?
Yeah, and it was disposed of from a university library, I believe. Oh, North Wales, yes. There's so few people use these things. But yeah, you get really lovely pictures of that's the soft tissue, and that's what the tubarium of Cephalodiscus looks like at fairly high magnification.
Is that hand coloured?
Quite possibly. I don't know if it's printing. It's very, very good.
Yeah, gradients in printing would have been very difficult at that time, I imagine.
Yes.
Whenever that time was.
They're not all that fancy, and that's that's still a very useful thing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, and these are incredibly useful for knowing what the soft parts look like in detail. So,
Yeah.
that's some of my nicer monographs.
Very nice too. Well, thank you very much.
No, right. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
So that's a small part of our library. I'm sure I'll dive into other bits of it at different times, just because there's so much still to be learned from these old volumes. And I hope you've got an appreciation of not just the amount of work that went into them, but how beautiful these things can be. Right, I will leave you there because I think this has probably run on quite a long time. But thank you again for joining in, and I hope that was interesting. And I'll get back to some more science soon. Right, see you again.